Alright, so this is the presentation on the Age of Exploration and Conquest. Please watch the presentation. You can stop at any time to take notes and rewind if need be, but please be prepared to discuss this information in class tomorrow. So the Age of Exploration and Conquest, this is the period between the 1400s and the 1700s when Europeans decided to leave the mainland and travel to other parts of the world. Now, there's several different reasons for the exploration. First off, the Renaissance, the Age of Awakening that happened in Europe, encouraged adventure and exploration. People were really curious about what was going on in other parts of the world. They had all these new manuscripts from the Middle East, and Europeans really wanted to start exploring other parts of the world to gain knowledge. In addition to that, the Crusades created contact with this outside world. The Christian Crusaders going to the Middle East, trying to capture Jerusalem and fighting back and forth, also exposed them to all sorts of different experiences and materials and things that Europeans wanted. In addition to that, Marco Polo's excursion to China in 1275 really expanded the possibilities for Europeans. He wrote books that were very popular in Europe and really amazed a lot of the Europeans and made them very curious about what was going on in the outside world. Before this time, during the Middle Ages and things like that, due to security, lack of resources, things like that, they didn't have the means or the will to explore. So there's a growth of the middle class, and this increases the desire to increase wealth across Europe. Europeans got a taste of the spices and luxury goods from Asia. These were brought back by the Crusaders. Things such as nutmeg, ginger, and cinnamon that made the real bland food of Europe much more exciting. And at this time, the demand was obviously much greater than the supply. There was a very limited amount of goods flowing into Europe. Majority of these goods were controlled by the Italians and the Muslims. The Italians would sail to the Middle East, gather spices, come back to Italy, and then distribute the goods through this process. A lot of the goods were very, very expensive due to this. There was a very high demand, very low supply, therefore they were very expensive. In addition to this, the Europeans wanted to expand Christianity. They felt that they had a holy duty to expand the Word of God and convert Muslims or other peoples to Christianity. Europeans felt they had a sacred duty to fight and also convert non-Christians throughout the world. And as Bartholomew Dias said, one of the early explorers of Portugal, to serve as God in His majesty, to give light to those who are in darkness, and to grow rich as all men desire to do. So, not only to spread the word of God, but also to grow rich. Now, improvements in technology had a significant role on the Age of Exploration. Without these advances in technology, there's no way the Europeans could have really explored and controlled the seas the way that they did. In the 1400s, the caravel was created. Now, this is a ship you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. It's much sturdier than old ships. It can carry a lot more goods, and also can sail against the wind with the triangular sails that they adopted from the Muslims. The Muslims had these triangular sails for hundreds of years. And finally, Europeans decided that this is probably a good route to go, so we can sail against the wind. In addition to that, navigational techniques were increasingly improved. The astrolabe by the Muslims, that gives you a declination and things like that to read the stars. The magnetic compass was created by the Chinese, and that really helped people with navigation and, of course, cartography or improved maps. The first European country to really start exploring were the Portuguese, and they had Prince Henry the Navigator, who was a very, very important leader in the world of navigation. He was the son of the Portugal's king, and he was really obsessed with exploring. Early on in life, he conquered Quetta in northern Africa, and he saw all the wealth and the beauty of all these other places, so he really encouraged Europeans to travel, and he really desired to reach the treasures in the East and to spread the faith of Christianity as well. So he founded a navigational school in Portugal, where he invited all the greatest map makers and explorers, instrument makers, everybody you can imagine that was into exploring. He invited to his school to train, and then sent them out in the name of Portugal to many parts of Africa. So by the 1460s, Portugal's had many, many trading posts along the west coast of Africa, and this became a springboard for further explorations. The first explorer to reach Asia was actually Vasco da Gama, and he was preceded by Bartholomew Diaz, who in 1488 reached the southern tip of Africa. And he saw that, all right, we're around Africa now, we got access to the east. So Vasco da Gama in 1498, about 10 years later, actually reached the port of Calicut in India. And there he was amazed by the spices, the rare silks, and the precious gems. He loaded up his boat and sailed back to Europe, and he made 60 times as much money as it cost to go on this trip. So obviously this was a huge deal for a lot of people. They were like, wow, we can make a lot of money. We can also get all these spices to Europe. And this creates the direct sea route to India, and a lot more people start sailing this way around Africa all the way to Italy, or India, excuse me. Then, once Spain saw Portugal's success, Spain wanted to join in as well. And so this is where Christopher Columbus comes in. In 1492, he convinces Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain to finance his trip. Now, Christopher Columbus is not actually Spanish, he is Italian. But he was a pretty well-known explorer, and he was able to convince the king and queen of Spain to finance his trip. So he sails west with the idea that if we sail west, the world is round, we're going to get to the East Indies. What actually ends up happening is he discovers, now discovers isn't a very good word since there were already hundreds of thousands of people living in the Americas, but he discovers the Americas. And this leads to a huge rivalry between Portugal and Spain. Now, the Catholic Pope did not want a lot of fighting to be happening between these two countries, so what he did is he created something called the Treaty of Tordesillas. So Pope Alexander VI, in order to keep the peace, he pretty much split the world in half. All right, he said everything east of this line is going to be Portuguese, everything west of this line is going to be Spanish. Now, this happened before they even really knew what the Americas was. And if you think about it, how can just a pope split the world between two countries? It's a little bit crazy. Anyway, so this is going to create some conflict in the future with other countries. So Vasco da Gama's trip opened up a sea route to India. It led to a mad scramble and violence between European powers and different lands' inhabitants. Those countries that were being invaded, obviously were not very happy with this. Portugal, since it had an early leg up, was able to establish a trading empire. It removed most of the Muslims from the spice trade. They had the advantage of having cannons. They established a fort of Hormuz, which was going to control the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. And then they find strategic points all over Africa and India and Asia in order to control the spice trade. So the Portuguese charged about 1/5 the price of Arabs and the Italian merchants, and so obviously people are going to buy from them. And there's a lot more spices flooding the continent of Europe. However, other countries wanted to join the fun as well. All right, so by the 1600s, the Dutch really started infringing on Portuguese territory. All right, they owned about 20,000 ships by 1600, which was the largest fleet in the world. In addition, the English and the Dutch wanted to challenge Portugal's control. And then they fought with each other as well. They both created what was called the East India Company, where they were going to control trade throughout Asia. The Dutch eventually win this battle early in the 1600s, and they're able to establish trading headquarters in Java. They seized Malacca from Portugal, which we'll look at on a map in class, and then Amsterdam becomes the commercial center of the world. Now, Indonesia was also known as the Spice Islands then. So the Dutch are going to have control of this for a couple hundred years, and they're going to gain a lot of wealth from controlling this territory. As you can see, here's a map you can look at in your book.